Right. So let's talk a little bit about information flow in React. Um, I've made a little blank repo if folks want to play along, the home version. Uh, Here it is. There's nothing in it because we haven't written anything yet. So first off, I'd like to start off, I guess, with uh, what about the information flow stuff do you feel comfortable with at all? And what do you want to talk about more? And see if we can meet somewhere useful there. Anyone can go.
Like for me, I get what it's doing,
Mhm.
but sometimes I can get kind of lost. Like when like the information passing it back and forth, like it can get kind of confusing for me
Mm.
sometimes. Yeah.
Actually, yeah, let's before we write any code, that's what seal light. Yeah, connected. Great. Let me talk through a little bit first, and I'm going to see if y'all can actually see um, this. Do you see a whiteboard type of thing here? I see it.
Yes.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about information. Ooh, how can I information flow? Great. So one of the main reasons right now we want to uh, use this pattern is because we have our uh, React app here and say, here's our app. If I draw a square, that's not a square. Here's our app. Great. And this has some kind of state in it here. So state. And this could be an array, it could be an object, could be a bunch of different things. But there's some state that hangs out up here in the app. And because of the way we're structuring things now, generally we're either going to start off with an object with some stuff in it or an array of items. We might be making a fetch call to populate that state. So we're going to have all the stuff in the sort of top level of our application that we need to uh, track, read, uh, change, any of that stuff. So if we have, so first off, we don't want all of our code in one component, right? That's the whole reason we're using this. So we have child components that do stuff and things and junk, and each of those, they can have their own state clearly, but often because of the way we are structuring stuff now, we're going to want to have them influence the parent state, and we can't do that directly. We can pass props down, but we can't pass them back up. So, and again, since all of our components are basically JavaScript functions, passing a prop is basically like passing an argument to a function. So if we send we have a user info card. So we send an object that has user info in that, and we use that there. So yeah, so say we have, yeah, let's do this. We have our, so here's our main app here. App. And, we have user info card here as a little guy. Info, enough, info. And maybe we have another component that is a form that has some fields in it. So this is our nav, this is our info, this is our form. Nav bar up here. So basically, when we have our form, we have some data in there, and we'll be sending that along. Here, we're going to have some info in our state, and that info is going to get passed down to the little card component so that we can see it in there. So if we want to change this state from our form, we need to somehow affect that parent, and we can't do that directly because we can't pass state up. We can't pass props up. What we can do, however, is in our in our app, I'm gonna make it a little bigger so I can draw it out a bit. App. Gotta get better with this trackpad. So here's our state. User equals blah blah blah. And so that has our user info in it. And we have our info component and info equals user or user equals user. So that's going to be passing this state down there. We can write a function up here that says, hey, function is going to take some info, and we're going to basically, set user info or whatever it is to the stuff that we pass to that function info. So this function is just a function that lives in this component. It's a regular function, which means it's an envelope full of instructions that we can pass around. It's a first class object. So we can, in our app here, we can call that function here to update the user. Maybe we're getting the initial load from a fetch, and so we can use this this function to set that user info there. But since it's a function, we can do whatever we like with it, right? Because it's it's just a thing we can pass around. So I'm gonna say handle handle info. Handle info. This will be better when I can type it. I'm gonna just call that, say that function. So that means I'm passing this function down here to our form. And then in our form, we have our stuff. We're keeping, you'll learn how to do this today in lecture, keeping in the state. But basically, we have our submit button, and that says, on submit, on the form, on submit. When we call that, so we have this, what user handle in it, handle user info, HUI function that we're bringing in as a prop. We can just use that and say, hey, when we submit this form, call that prop user info, and call it with our state here. And so since we're calling this function here that we're passed here, this is kind of going to allow us to pass information back up. We're not actually sending information back up. What it's like is app has a app sends the form a little burner phone and says, hey, whenever you need me to update my information, call me on this number and I'll do it. So it's not actually sending it back up, but it's kind of like throwing a conduit. We're building a line through which we can send that information back up. And that is basically like the way I am writing things. Can anyone else not see the things I'm writing? Okay, cool. Are you in gallery mode or focus mode? I don't know if that changes things. I know it works in gallery mode, I think. If you click the upper right hand side, there's the view thing that should be able to do it. Okay, cool. Come back and try it. Great, thanks for calling that out. So, and this is basically the whole information flow thing. And it doesn't matter how how deep our app goes. We can have, something over here that has something over here that has something over here and something over here that has something over here that has something over here. And we can, have our state up here. We can write a function that changes the state down here, and we can pass bits of state down and down and down to display in here. We can also pass this burner, this handler through a prop down here, down here, down here. And so then when we call that handler, it's going to call a function, call a function, call a function, update the state, and then state's going to be passed back down. So when it gets to this kind of point, there are different ways to structure a program that we'll talk about probably next week. But this is basically the deal. Since you can't update state of a parent directly, you have to get something that allows you, a pager or a walkie-talkie or a burner phone, to tell app, hey, change state. And I know some folks were asking about having like a little trouble getting their head around state. The reason we keep variables in state in a React component is so we can display stuff from that. And also the React library, when we call the set state function that says, hey, set this variable and also re-render this component. So run our function again, run our component again, and spit out the new stuff. So anytime you want to update something in the state of your component, it's going to re-render that so you can see the new state. And it only re-renders when state changes. Great. So that's the basics there. Any questions on the overview, and then we'll look at code. Or any sort of theoretical or philosophical issues with any of this.
I had a quick question.
Yeah.
So yesterday during the lecture, Dakota was talking about storing the state like in the lowest possible rung while also like passing it down so it's the most efficient.
Yeah.
Like this is probably bad habit, but you could technically just store all the state in the app, right?
Yeah.
Because
well,
like
so
theoretically.
yeah, so theoretically, and here's my philosophy of state. Totally agree with what Dakota said. You want to store state in the lowest useful place. So if we have data that is going to be used in our entire app, it needs to be up top. But if we have state of a so actually we can't store it all up in state always. So say we have two say we have two cards that are user info cards. We can't store both of these in state up top because they each have their own local version of that state. They have their own internal state, right? So if we change one, we don't want both to change. And this is kind of my internal sort of separation. There's basically like data and there's state. Data is the information that we want to work with that isn't necessarily intrinsic to a component. So like even with the app up top, we have an array of user info up top. That doesn't really describe that component. That describes stuff that the component is using. That's a very subtle difference. Whereas state is actually the state of the component itself. So like if we have a drop-down menu, what's in that? If we have a light mode, dark mode button, if the thing is hidden or not, it's a modal that we can't see until a state is set. So in general, and we can't do it right now because I haven't taught you recoil. Right now, we need to keep our data in state at probably the highest level because the whole app is going to use it. In general, you want to keep the state as low as possible because, like for the user info card here, right? All this one cares about here, all that card cares about is I'm a card, I get some user info and I display it a certain way. It doesn't care about anything else in the entire application. What page it's on, where it is, what the rest of the page look like. All a component cares about is itself and what it does. And if it has a line up top, like it can talk to other people, but all a component should be worried about is its own stuff. So the state of that component is always going to be stored as locally as possible so that you don't have to unnecessarily think outside of your little box. So your component is only concerned with itself and its children. Yeah. Does that get to what you're asking?
Yeah. Like I think when you're kind of explaining like two children being attached to one parent, but that's also of children of the app, I think that cleared it up.
Cool. Awesome. Any other questions before we look at some code? All right. So in shortly, there's some optional sections in Canvas about Redux. I recommend ignoring those completely, and I'll show you Recoil instead. Does exactly the same thing, and it's like a tenth as complicated. So that's for Project Week. You don't need to worry about it yet. Let me close this whiteboard. Hello, everybody. And let's take a look at some code. So share my screen here. That we hide the meeting controls, bring it all over here. Great. And so I made a copy of this repo here. Did I paste it? Yeah, I pasted it. So it's pasted in chat. So this is just a blank empty repo. I pulled all the junk out of it, so we can do what we want. I'm not going to change any of the title or anything. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So information up top. I'm not going to do a fetch or anything. I'm just going to have some state up here. I'm going to define what's our domain. I'm just going to do user info. So we start talking about it. I'm going to say user info const. How does JavaScript work? Equals and we'll have ID 1 name Mark and email. It's not actually mail. We'll have another user ID 2 name. Great. So here's our fantastic user information. And so again, we could get this from a fetch. We could include it as another file if we want to. We could import it. If we had a .js file that just exported an object or a list, we could import that into our module here, into our component here. But instead of that, I'm going to set state. So I'm going to have a state called, I'm going to call it seed info. How about that? Seed user info. Cool. So I'm going to have a state in my app, and this is the highest level of our application. And I'm going to say cost. I'm going to change this one more time. Const users and set users. I'm going to use state. I almost never have to type the imports up here. VS Code should do this for you these days. If I just say use state, it'll bring that import in for you. And the initial one, important thing about state, which you may or may not have come across yet. If your state is going to be an array of things, make sure you start off with an empty array. If it's going to be an object, make sure you start off with an empty object. If it's a string, start off with an empty string. If it's a number, start off with a reasonable number, 0 or whatever. The reason is that often we will be, so say we're fetching this and we say use state start with nothing. We have a component that's going to do a map that shows a bunch of stuff, and we're doing a fetch that pulls stuff in. When that state updates, it's going to show it. We're going to get errors because you can't map over undefined. And I guarantee at least half of you will find this error before too long, definitely in your projects. So just make sure when you are starting a state, make sure that state is the same shape as the thing that you're going to be putting in there. So that said, starting off with an initial empty array, actually, I don't have to do that because I'm not fetching. So I'm just going to say user info. So I should be setting my state like this. And in fact, let me start up. Start. I hope y'all have been playing with the React Dev tools. That's not what I wanted. There. Let's do that. We can look in our tools here. This is a Chrome extension. I believe there's one for Firefox as well. I don't know about Safari, but there's a React component inspector here, and we can actually look at our components. Hey, this is the app component. And if we click in, hey, we've got state, and that has what we wanted. Great. So it'll nest components down here so you can see what they look like. It's super, super, super handy for debugging. So we've got our state set. So again, state is just letting us know that this information is probably going to change, and when it changes, we want to re-render that component, not necessarily the whole thing, just the one component. So let's just do the thing we said here. What do we say? It's the useful thing here. Yeah, I'm going to do a user card, and that's just going to display a name and I think user card. This is going to be a export default function user card, and we're just going to take a user as props, and we're gonna, so we can either do take props and then do props.user down here. Or we can just destructure it on the way in. And that's just by putting that, and we had more than one, we'd do, yeah, whatever, handle form, submit. So this is called destructuring. Basically, we're saying, hey, we're expecting to get an object. That object is going to have these properties. Just throw them in variables for me. So don't worry about the handle submit yet. That's just for demo. What I do want here is I want the function to return some JSX for us. I'm going to call this card. And in here, I'm just going to put the username and email. So it's going to be h2 is user and put h3 with email. Great. And so now this is exported. We are not keeping any state in here because we're getting our user info from the thing. And actually, we don't need that here because that's going to be in the other part. So all the card cares about is itself. It's just going to be displaying a user. It's getting that user through props, and it's going to be displaying the thing. And now we can throw it in here. Say, here's users. So I'm just going to show one user right now. And in fact, I'm going to change this to just an object for simplicity. So our user info is now an object. Set user, great. User. And I'm just going to put in header here, and I'm going to include my new user card. And we're importing it from user card up there. We need to tell it who it's going to display. So I'm just going to say user equals user. And that's our guy. That's me. And typing is great. And in the, I'm going to put a CSS in the card here. So I'm going to put a CSS, user card.css. And we're just going to say, what was it? Card. It's going to be border 3 pixels solid black. Have some padding. Whatever. Whatever. And I'm just picky. And it'll have height and width. Pixel. Size. We'll say it's 2M. Great. What does this look like now? We need to import it first. Import user card.css. And if I did everything right, uh-oh. Yeah, great. We're not using set user yet. So if I did everything right, that should be updated with nothing. Email is not defined. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Username, user email. There we go. So here's our info, user mark, email, and my email. I can make that a little wider just so I can see it. Great. So this is what our user card is doing. So I'm just going to do that dumb little form that we had. I'm going to show you a little preview of the controlled state, and we'll get there. So I'm going to say user form, we'll call it. User form.js. It's going to be, I had a shortcut to do all this, but I can't remember what it was. Function user form. And we're just going to return a form. I'm going to put it inside. Yeah, I'll just make a form. And the form is going to have just the user name and user email. So input next name equals name. And email. And I would like to include that form underneath here. Right under here. User form. Great. I'm not passing anything into it yet because we don't know what we're doing yet. Let's see what that does for us. Hey, there's a little form. So name and email. I'm just going to set those as labels real quick. It'll look exactly the same, but let's see. Oh, yeah. Put labels on it and it formats it nicely for you. Great. Cool. So thank you, autofill. I need a submit button too. Great. I'm just gonna put that in a little. Oh, what do I want to do? Oh, that's fine. Yeah. Don't do this. Don't do this. That's such a bad idea. Cool. So So I've got my form here. So really, really briefly, and lecture is going to go into this. I'm going to control this form, and that means all of these things, all of these two things, I'm going to keep in state. So I'm going to make two states. I'm going to say, if I had like a bunch, I'd probably make it an object, but right now I'm just going to make them two separate states. I'm going to say const name. Nope, username. Set state. Nope, not set state. Use state. That's very fun. And set it to nothing. And same thing with user email. So I have two set user email. So I have two states. What I want to do is set the value of these to what is in the state. So I have these two inputs. I'm going to say value equals username and value equals user email. So now whatever the value is that's in the state is going to show up here. And since there is username, maybe I want to put it in brackets instead. Yeah. Now, whatever value is in there, which is nothing, will show up. If we gave it some default state, those would show up instead. Yes. So to sort of close this feedback loop, we want to say whenever we type in the field, update the state. So I'm just going to do an onChange handler for both of these. And I'm going to do it inline just for simplicity. OnChange is, we're just going to say, this is an event handler. And we're going to say that we're going to set username to the event target value. And since it's the input that is throwing the change event when we type in it, the target is the form itself, the field itself. So we're just saying set the username to the value in the field. I can do the same thing for the other one. This feels like I might put it into an infinite loop. It does not. There. And I'll tell you why in just a second. Set user email. Great. So it initially sets it to nothing. And we can see that in our app. Hello, why are we not showing our whole thing? Reload. There we go. So in our user form, we've got two states and there's nothing in them. When I type in this here, Ed, every time I type a letter, you can see is updating the state. So on change, it's going to look at the value of itself and update the state. And the reason that doesn't go into a loop because we're setting the value of that to whatever the state is that when you say set state, whatever the function is, you're not actually setting it right then. You are enqueuing a polite request to React to say, if you don't mind, when you have time, please set the value of this thing to this. So that means that when it renders this form, it's going to set the state. Then when we type in it, it's going to say, hey, when you get a chance, can you update this? Then it's going to update it and then set the new state, set the new value there. And there's no jam up. A little bit complex. You don't have to know how it works. You can just trust in the process and do it this way. And this is probably new to you, so you'll see this in lecture tonight. But the important part is, yeah, Gabby, what's up?
Oh yeah, I just going back to like where state lives. Why does state live here and not in app if assuming that we're going to be using the user name and user email in the card?
Yeah.
Is this just am I thinking too far ahead? Is this just now to set up the functionality?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So this is to set up the functionality of this form. And so we want to keep state for the value of the form because that is describing the state, describing what's happening with this component now. So this component is only concerned about itself. If we wanted to, since there's only the one form, we could pass down a handler for each one of these things and have it called that handler. But if we, for whatever reason, wanted to have two different forms on a page, they need to have their own state. They can't rely on the one upstairs. But yeah, in general, we want our state to describe this component, and that's describing this here. If it was the app, that is describing part of what's in the app, but it's like it would be like declaring a global variable instead of a variable inside of a function. That makes more sense. You want to keep it tight so it's more modular and flexible. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah, great question. Cool. So we are setting a state here. So now let's hook up our submit button. And so I'm going to do an on submit here. And I'm just going to say handle submit. And that means I need to make a function called handle submit. And since it's an event handler, it's going to take an event. And right now I'm just going to have it console log out. Hey, we did it. And we also need to prevent the default because we don't want the page reloading. Because this is a submit event that we're getting from the form. So let's just make sure that the form is actually hooked up. Yeah, we did it. Cool. So let's go back to our component view there. So we know that our handler is being called when we click on the submit button. So let's see what else we want to console log. Let's console log out. I'm just going to console log out the state here. So console log, name is username, email is user email. So this should be interesting. When we, let me reload this here. So type something in here. Is Mark, email is not yet. So can after proper. Okay, that's just icon stuff. So when I hit update here, I expect to see it say name Mark and email none your business, because that is the function that we're calling as the handler. And in fact, it is doing that. So it is, when we're typing, it's updating the state. So as we type, the state gets updated. When we hit submit, so I don't have to like go in here and get the target value out. I don't need to do any of that stuff. Whenever I'm going to be working with the state, I can just use the names of the variables. Super handy. Much more visibly handy when you have a whole bunch of things. And in fact, we could use the same function for this. I'm not going to go into that now, but you'll probably see it later on today. Important part is we have a function that we can call with the name and email. Great. So the trick we want to do now is take this information and update the information up in app. We want to update this info. So to do that, I'm going to need that burner. I'm going to need a method to update the state that I can pass down. So you can do it either way. You can write it using the handler in your component and then write the function and pass it down, or you can write the function first and pass it down. Doesn't matter either way, just whatever makes more sense to you. Right now, today, it makes more sense to me to write the function in the app. So the thing we want to do is change the state in the app. So I'm going to write a function that does that. It's going to take, I'm just going to take a user and email. And all we're going to do, let's give it a name. Update user. So the function update user, all it does is we're going to set user, and we need to pass it a function that looks like this. And I'm going to say the ID is user ID. The name is our name, and our email is our email. And so this is just a function, and we're not doing anything with this function yet. We could call it in here if we wanted on a button click. All this is saying hey, this is a function that takes a name and an email, and all I'm going to do is set user for our state. I'm going to set it to an object with the same ID, but with the name and email that it's sending me. Again, this is not hooked up to anything yet. This is just a function that sets a user. Nothing fancy. But we're going to use it for something. So I'm going to say this is, did I call it handle submit in here? Handle submit. I'm going to call it update user because that's what we're doing. There's some reasoning behind what I'm calling it that won't make sense until probably next week. So we'll talk about it and review that. But right now, I'm just passing down this function as a prop. I'm saying, to the user form function, I'm giving the argument of update user. And so I can grab that from props. So user form sending the function update user as a prop called update user. And that means I can grab it out of props here. So I can do that, or I can grab props and say props.update user. This way is just a little bit nicer. So this is that function. This is just the function that takes a name and email and updates this object with this thing here. So let's hook that up. So I'm grabbing it with update user. Right now, all I need to do is say update user, this, update user with username and user email. And so since this is just calling that function, just like we would if it was anywhere else, it's calling this update user function that we passed down here. This function is just going to take the name and email that we gave it and update this state up here. And so that should change the information in the card when we submit it. Let's see if that's true. So business.com. So we have our form here. We can see that our states are set to Mark and Nunya. So that's this state and this state because we are controlling that form. And now when we hit this bit button, it's just going to call this update user that we passed in here. And that update user is going to in-queue a request to change that state. When that state changes, it's going to re-render the app and we should see the new information since we are passing that down to the user card there. Am I lying? I'm not. Yeah, good me. Cool. So now we have that sort of triangle structure that we were talking about. Well, we have our app at the top. It has a user card on one side and user form on the other. The user card, it's passing a prop down to, and that card is doing what it wants, in this case, displaying that. The form, we're passing a prop down as well. That prop is a function that it can use to call back up and say, hey, app, update, or hey, app, call this function that you sent me with these two arguments. And app is like, cool, that function updates my state. Hey, state, update. And state's like, you got it. Let me re-render the thing. And then the thing re-renders and says, hey, user card, I've got new props for you. And it's like, cool, I'm going to display it up here. And it does. And so, yeah, that is a basic example of information flow. Again, it's a real application is going to be much more complex, passing stuff down and back up, but ideally not more than a level or two. So that is the basic rundown. What questions do you have for me? Or was that just too much? Is there any part of this procedure that like just totally lost you? You can't follow it all. Clint, how are we feeling? Thumbs up.
Um,
Yeah.
on on lines 11 through 13, that function update user.
Mhm.
Jeez. So I understand that on line 12 set user, you're updating the user object on line 9,
Mhm.
right? Which is like what's rendering like the big information card on the app. But I'm kind of confused as to the syntax after set user, like that object that you're that.
Yeah, so this is the shortcut syntax again. Let me bust this out a little bit so it looks more like an object. So this is our shortcut syntax that we can use in the objects. So this is just like saying
Oh, I see.
name, email. When the key name in an object and the variable name are the same, we can just shortcut it by saying that.
Okay.
But it is otherwise exactly identical to doing it name, email.
Okay. Got it.
Cool. What else we have questions about?
I have a question about naming. Like, I saw that you named the prop the same as the function. Is it just easier to do that? Like, would you recommend doing that?
Yeah, so there are different reasons to do it. It's right now I'm doing it because it makes sense because that's the only thing it's doing. You will come across an example next week probably where say we have two card components, and inside those card components is a button. When you click the button, it does something. But we can use those card components in two different places in the app, and we want them to behave differently depending on where they are. So instead of passing down a prop called update user, I'd probably call it like handle click or handle submit. And then we could pass different functions down to that. And so depending on where we are in the app, what functions we pass down to it, they can behave differently. And I would name it like handle submit or handle click or something, because all this component cares about is what it does. Since this is a form, it's like, cool, I'm going to submit my form. I'm going to handle submit. But if it's a more flexible one that can be used elsewhere, it might just have a button, and it's like, cool, all I know is that I have a button. When I click the button, I'm going to do the thing you told me to. I don't know what that thing is, and I don't care. I'm just doing the thing. So it would be like handle click, because like I got a button, and when you click it, I'm going to do the thing that you sent me. And that can be different things for different components. We could have, if we name this handle submit, I said I'd talk about it later, and I'm doing it right now. Handle submit. Boom, handle submit. And we'll call this one submit form. Cool. So now, functionally, they're still identical. Semantically, before this component knew that it was updating user info. So even though, I mean, we as programmers reading the component know, oh, this is going to be updating user info. Ideally, we shouldn't know or care about anything outside this component. All we should care about is that I'm getting a function, and when I submit this form, I'm going to call that function. What it does, not my problem, none of my business. And so in here, we could say, oh, here's here's function holler, and all it does is alert, wrong form. And so we can have a second form that uses our holler function. So these forms are going to look the same. And since they have their own state, I can type in one and not affect the other one. When I click this one, I said, hey, when you submit, and it's like, cool, I'm just going to do what you tell me, handle submit. I got that submit handled. When I click this one, it's going to update the state because that's what I sent down as the prop. Great, it does that. This one looks the same, but I'm passing it holler instead. And so if I click this one, it's just going to say, hey, wrong form, and not update the form because I'm not telling it to. So this lets you make more generalized, flexible components. Clearly, this is a dumb example, but you will definitely see more real examples next week. So yeah, so short version, that's why I'm naming it that. The form itself shouldn't care what it's doing besides taking care of business there. Whatever that business is not the form's problem. It is the app's problem. Does that help clear things up a little bit?
Yeah, I think it was helpful to just see how you use that same prop on another one.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, and again, like this is why naming stuff is so important for me, because if I wrote, oh, update user equals this, it's going to be the same, functionality. If I do update, update user, I call it this in here. Hey, I'm going to call this update user. So again, these are going to behave exactly the same. Cool. No. So it behaves exactly the same. And inside is like the form's like, cool, I'm going to update the user. Great. I don't know what a user is, but I'm going to update it. But now it looks weird here. Like, cool, update user holler. Why would I do that? So for me, when I have multiple, or when I tend to have multiple things, or even I'm just thinking about it, I'll try to name those things more what they actually are to the component instead of what they are to the parent. If that makes sense, or if that confuses things more. You good with all that? Cool. Awesome. We've been good on time. What other questions do we have in the last 5 minutes or so?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Well, it's not related to this, but I just have a question about the code challenge.
Mhm.
Like the phase one, we didn't have post, patch, and delay.
Mhm.
But I'm asking what will be the core deliverables for this code challenge, actually? Like everything that is inside phase two will be there for the code challenge, or some of the things that we are learning won't be there?
Yeah, I think it'll have everything. I don't believe it's going to have post patch delete. So you'll probably be doing a fetch with a get,
Okay.
updating state in the application, using that state to render out components, and there'll be a form on there that lets you change something, or a button or a form, some sort of event thing.
So
Yeah.
everything will be there. Like so far, every single thing will be there.
So far, yeah. Next Thursday. You got a week. And we'll do the same thing we did last time, review stuff that covers exactly the same stuff, basically. A really good handle on it. That answer your question?
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, you got plenty of time. You got it. And the first code challenge is just practice. So you got 2 weeks actually. Yeah, and starting on your project, you will definitely have more practice doing this because your project's going to need all this too. So yeah, it's just a matter of repetition. Just do it over and over again until it makes sense. Draw drawings. That helps me. Even though I can't see pictures in my head, I can see pictures on a page, and I'm aphantasic and a visual learner is a weird combination. So draw pictures. It helps. Cool. Any last questions? Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and push this code up to that repo. Cool. So that repo is updated. If you want the blank version, you can just go back one commit. Let me stop sharing here. There's everybody. Awesome. Yeah, so that was a whirlwind tour, and includes stuff you haven't learned yet, but it will be recorded. It is being recorded right now. I'll put the recording up on YouTube and post the links in the usual places, so you can come back and review this as well if you like. Yeah, hopefully that clarified some things. And if not, feel free to ask questions. I'll always be around to help out. Parting thoughts, parting words, questions. Awesome. Looks great. Cool. Break for an hour or so and hit lecture. Thanks for hanging out. I'll post this up when it gets rendered, and I'll see you in a little bit.